guys, welcome back. This is actually our last episode in Charlotte's Web. We're going to find out what happens to Charlotte and Wilbur, and we'll get started. This is called The Last Day. Charlotte and Wilbur were alone. The families had gone to look for Fern, and Templeton was asleep. Wilbur lay resting after his excitement and strain of the ceremony, and his medal still hung from his neck. By looking out of the corner of his eye, he could see it. "Charlotte," said Wilbur after a while, "why are you so quiet?" "I like to sit still," she said. "I've always been rather quiet." "Yes, but you seem specially so today. Do you feel all right?" "A little tired, perhaps, but I feel peaceful. Your success in the ring this morning was, to a small degree, my success. Your future is assured, and you will live secure and safe, Wilbur. Nothing will harm you now. These autumn days will shorten and grow cold. The leaves will shake loose from the trees and fall. Christmas will come and the snows of winter. You will live to enjoy the beauty of the frozen world. For you mean a great deal to the Zuckermans, and he will not harm you ever. Winter will pass, the days will lengthen, the ice will melt in the pasture pond, the song sparrow will return and sing, the frogs will awake, the warm wind will blow again, and all the sights and sounds and smells will be yours to enjoy, Wilbur. This lovely world, these precious days." Charlotte stopped. A moment later, a tear came to Wilbur's eyes. "Oh, Charlotte," he said, "to think that when I first met you, I thought you were cruel and bloodthirsty." When he recovered from his emotions, he spoke again. "Why did you do all this for me, Charlotte?" he asked. "I don't deserve it. I've never done anything for you." "You've been my friend," replied Charlotte, "and that in itself is a tremendous thing. I wove my webs for you because I liked you, and after all, what's a life anyway? You're born, you live a little while, we die. A spider's life can't help being something of a mess, with all this trapping and eating flies. By helping you, perhaps, I was trying to lift up my life a trifle. Heaven knows anyone's life can stand a little bit of that." "Well," said Wilbur, "I'm not good at making speeches. I haven't got your gift for words, but you've saved me, Charlotte, and I would gladly give my life for you. I really would." "I'm sure you would, and I thank you for your generous sentiments." "Charlotte," said Wilbur, "we're all going home today. The fair's almost over. Won't it be wonderful to get back home in the barn cellar again with the sheep and the geese? Aren't you anxious to get home?" For a moment Charlotte said nothing, and then she spoke in a voice so low that Wilbur could barely hear the words. "I will not be going back to the barn," she said. Wilbur leapt to his feet. "Not going back?" he cried. "Charlotte, what are you talking about?" "I'm done for," she replied. "In a day or two, I'll be dead. I haven't even strength enough to climb down into the crate. I doubt I have enough silk in my spinnerets to lower me to the ground." Hearing this, Wilbur threw himself down in agony and pain of sorrow. Great sobs racked from his body. He heaved and groaned in desolation. "Charlotte," he moaned, "Charlotte, my dear friend." "Come on, let's not make a scene," said the spider. "Be quiet, Wilbur. Stop thrashing about." "But I can't stand it," shouted Wilbur. "I won't leave you here alone to die. If you're going to stay here, I'm going to stay here too." "Don't be ridiculous," said Charlotte. "You can't stay here. Zuckerman and Lurvy and John Arable and the others will be back any minute now, and they'll shove you into the crate and away you'll go. Besides, it wouldn't make any sense for you to stay. There would be no one to feed you. The fairgrounds will be empty soon and deserted." Wilbur was in a panic. He raced around the pen and suddenly had an idea. He thought of the egg sack and the 514 little spiders that would hatch in the spring. If Charlotte herself was unable to go home to the barn, at least he must take her children along. Wilbur rushed to the front of his pen. He put his front feet on the top board and gazed around. In the distance he saw the Arables and the Zuckermans approaching. He knew he'd have to act quickly. "Where's Templeton?" he demanded. "He's in that corner under the straw asleep," said Charlotte. Wilbur rushed over, pushed his strong snout under the rat, and tossed him up in the air. "Templeton!" screamed Wilbur. "Pay attention!" The rat, surprised out of a sound sleep, looked first dazed and disgusted. "What kind of monkey shine is this?" he growled. "Can't a rat catch a wink of sleep without being rudely popped into the air?" "Listen to me," said Wilbur. "Charlotte's very ill. She only has a short time to live, and she can't accompany us home because of her condition. Therefore, it's absolutely necessary I take her egg sack with me. I can't reach it, and I can't climb. You're the only one that can get it. There's not a second to be lost. The people are coming. They'll be here in no time. Please, Templeton, please, please, climb up and get the egg sack." The rat yawned. He straightened his whiskers. Then he looked at the egg sack. "So," he said in disgust, "so it's old Templeton to the rescue again, is it? Templeton, do this. Templeton, do that. Templeton, please run to the dump. Get me a magazine clipper. Templeton, lend me a piece of string so I can spin a web. Hurry, said Wilbur. Hurry up, Templeton. But the rat wasn't in a hurry, and he began imitating Wilbur's voice. So it's hurry up, Templeton, is it? Well, he said, ho, ho. And what thanks do I ever get for my services? I would like to know. Never a kind word for old Templeton. Only abuse and wisecracks and side remarks. Never a kind word for the rat. Templeton, said Wilbur in desperation. If you don't stop talking and get busy, all will be lost, and I will die of a broken heart. Please climb up. Templeton laid back down in the straw, lazily. He placed his forepaws behind his head and crossed his knees in an attitude of complete relaxation. Die of a broken heart, he mimicked. How touching, my. I notice that it's always me you come to when in trouble, but I've never heard of anyone's heart breaking on my account. Oh no, who cares anything about old Templeton? Get up, screamed Wilbur. Stop acting like a spoiled child. Templeton grinned and laid still. Who made trip after trip to the dump, he asked. Why, it was old Templeton. Who saved Charlotte's life from being by scaring that arable boy away with a rotten goose egg? Bless my soul, I believe it was old Templeton. Who bit your tail and got you back on your feet this morning after you fainted in front of the crowd? Old Templeton. Has it ever occurred to you that I'm sick of running errands and doing favors? What do you think I am anyway, a rat of all work? Wilbur was desperate. The people were coming, and the rat was failing him, and suddenly he remembered Templeton's fondness of food. Templeton, he said, I will make you a solemn promise. Get Charlotte's egg sack for me, and from now on I'll let you eat first when Lurvy slops me. I'll let you have your choice of everything in the trough, and I won't touch a thing until you're through. The rat sat up. You mean that? He said. I promise, across my heart. All right, it's a deal, said the rat. He walked to the wall and started to climb. His stomach was still swollen from last night's gorge. Groaning and complaining, he pulled himself slowly to the ceiling. He crept along till he reached the egg sack. Charlotte moved aside for him. She was dying, but she still had enough strength to move away a little. Then Templeton bared his long, ugly teeth and began snipping the threads that fastened the sack to the ceiling. Wilbur watched from below. Use extreme care, he said. I don't want a single one of those eggs harmed. This stuff fits in my mouth, complained the rat. It's worse than caramel candy. But Templeton worked away at the job and managed to cut the sack adrift and carry it to the ground, where he dropped it in front of Wilbur. Wilbur heaved a great sigh of relief. Thank you, Templeton, he said. I'll never forget this as long as I live. Neither will I, said the rat, picking his teeth. I feel as though I've eaten a spool of thread. Well, home we go. Templeton crept into his crate and buried himself in the straw. He got out of sight just in time, and Lurvy and John Arable and Mr. Zuckerman came along at that moment, followed by Mrs. Arable and Mrs. Zuckerman, Avery, and Fern. Wilbur had already decided that he would carry the egg sack. There was only one way possible. He carefully took the little bundle in his mouth and held it there on top of his tongue. He remembered that Charlotte had told him that the sack was waterproof and strong. It felt funny on his tongue and it made him drool a bit. And of course he couldn't say anything. But he was being shoved into the crate. He looked up at Charlotte and gave her a wink. She knew he was saying goodbye in the only way he could, and she knew her children were safe. Goodbye, she whispered. She summoned all her strength and waved one of her front legs at him. She never moved again. Next day, as the Ferris wheel was being taken apart and the racehorses were being loaded into the vans and the entertainers were packing up their belongings and driving away with their trailers, Charlotte died. The fairgrounds were soon deserted. The sheds and buildings were empty and forlorn. The infield was littered with bottles and trash. Nobody of the hundreds of people that had visited the fair knew that a gray spider had played the most important part of all. No one knew. No one was with her when Charlotte had died. And this is called A Warm Wind. And so Wilbur came back to his beloved manure pile in the barn cellar. His was a strange homecoming. Around his neck he wore a medal of honor, and in his mouth he held a sack of spider's eggs. There was no place like home, Wilbur thought, as he placed Charlotte's 514 unborn children carefully in a safe corner. The barn smelled good, and his friends the sheep and the geese were glad to see him back. The geese gave him a noisy welcome. Congratulations, they cried. Nice work. Mr. Zuckerman took the medal from Wilbur's neck and hung it on the nail over the pig pen where visitors could examine it, and Wilbur himself could look at it whenever he wanted to. In the days that followed, he was very happy. He grew to a great size, and he was no longer worried about being killed, for he knew that Mr. Zuckerman would keep him as long as he lived. Wilbur often thought of Charlotte, and a few strands of her old web still hung in the doorway. Every day Wilbur would stand and look at the torn, empty web with a lump that would come in his throat. No one had ever had such a friend. so affectionate, so loyal, and so skillful. The autumn days grew shorter, and Lurvy brought the squashes and pumpkins in from the garden and piled them in the barn floor, where they wouldn't get nipped on frosty nights. The maples and birches turned bright colors, and the wind shook them, and they dropped their leaves one by one to the ground. Under the wild apple trees in the pasture, the little red apples lay thick on the ground, and the sheep gnawed them, and the geese gnawed them, and the foxes came in at night and sniffed them. One evening, just before Christmas, snow began falling. It covered the house and the barn and the fields and the woods. Wilbur had never seen snow before, and when morning came, he went out and plowed in the drifts in the yard for the fun of it. Fern and Avery arrived, dragging a sled, and they coasted down the lane and out onto the frozen pond in the pasture. "Coasting's the most fun there is," said Avery. "The most fun there is," retorted Fern, "is when the Ferris wheel stops and Henry and I are on the top car, and Henry makes the car swing and we can see everything for miles and miles and miles." "Goodness, are you still thinking about that old Ferris wheel?" said Avery in disgust. "The fair was weeks and weeks ago." "I think about it all the time," said Fern, picking snow from her ear. After Christmas, the thermometer dropped to 10 below zero. Cold settled in on the world, and the pasture was bleak and frozen. The cows stayed in the barn all the time, except on sunny mornings when they went out and stood in the barnyard in the lee of the straw pile. The sheep stayed near the barn, too, for protection. When they were thirsty, they ate snow. The geese hung around in the barnyard the way boys hang around a drugstore, and Mr. Zuckerman fed them corn and turnips to keep them cheerful. "Many, many, many thanks," they'd always say when they saw food coming. Templeton moved indoors when the winter came. His ratty home was under the pig trough was too chilly, so he fixed himself a cozy nest in the barn behind the grain bins. He lined it with bits of dirty newspapers and rags, and whenever he found a trinket or a keepsake, he carried it home and stored it there too. He continued to visit Wilbur 3 times a day, exactly at mealtime, and Wilbur kept his promise he'd made. Wilbur let the rat eat first. Then when Templeton couldn't hold another mouthful, Wilbur would eat. And as a result of overeating, Templeton grew bigger and fatter than any rat you ever saw. He was gigantic. He was as big as a young woodchuck. The old sheep spoke to him about his size one day. "You would live longer," said the old sheep, "if you ate less." "Who wants to live forever?" sneered the rat. "I'm naturally a heavy eater, and I got untold satisfaction from the pleasures of the feast." He patted his stomach, grinned at the sheep, and crept upstairs to lie down. All winter, Wilbur watched over Charlotte's egg sack, as though he were guarding his own children. He had scooped out a special place in the manure for the sack, next to the board fence. On very cold nights, he'd lay so that his breath would warm it. For Wilbur, nothing in life was so important as this small round object. Nothing else mattered. Patiently he awaited the end of winter and the coming of the little spiders. Life was always rich in steady time when you were waiting for something to happen or hatch. The winter ended at last. "I heard the frogs today," said the old sheep one evening. "Listen, you can hear them now." Wilbur stood still and cocked his ears. From the pond, a shrill chorus, came the voices of 100 little frogs. "Springtime," said the old sheep thoughtfully. "Another spring." She walked away, and Wilbur saw a new lamb following her. It was only a few hours old. The snows melted and ran away. The streams and ditches bubbled and chattered with rushing water. A sparrow with a streaky breast arrived and sang. The light strengthened. The mornings came sooner. And almost every morning there was another new lamb in the sheepfold, and the goose was sitting on 9 eggs. The sky seemed wider, and the warm wind blew, and the last remaining strands of Charlotte's old web floated away and vanished. One fine sunny morning after breakfast, Wilbur stood watching his precious sack. He was thinking of anything much. He wasn't thinking of anything much. As he stood there, he noticed something move. He stepped closer and stared, and a tiny spider crawled from the sack. It was no bigger than a grain of sand, no bigger than the head of a pin. Its body was gray with a black stripe underneath, and its legs were gray and tan. It looked just like Charlotte. Wilbur trembled all over when he saw it. The little spider waved at him, and then Wilbur looked more closely. 2 more spiders crawled out and waved. They climbed round and round on the sack, exploring their new world. Then 3 more spiders came, then 8, then 10. Charlotte's children were here at last. Wilbur's heart pounded. He began to squeal, and then he raced in circles, kicking manure into the air, and then he turned to backflip. He planted his front feet and came down to a stop in front of Charlotte's children. "Hello there," he said. The first spider said hello, but its voice was so small, Wilbur couldn't hear it. "I'm an old friend of your mother's," said Wilbur. "I'm glad to see you. Are you all right? Is everything all right?" The spiders waved their forelegs at him, and Wilbur could see by the way they acted that they were glad to see him. "Is there anything I can get you? Is there anything you need?" The young spiders just waved, and for several days and several nights they crawled here and there, up and down, around and about, waving at Wilbur, trailing tiny drag lines behind them and exploring their new home. There were dozens and dozens of them, and Wilbur couldn't count them all, but he knew he had a great many new friends. They grew quite rapidly. Soon, each was as big as a BB shot, and they made tiny webs near the sack. Then came a quiet morning when Mr. Zuckerman opened the door of the north side, and a warm draft of rising wind blew softly through the barn cellar. The air smelled of damp earth, spruce trees, and a sweet springtime. The baby spiders felt the warm updraft, and one spider climbed to the top of the fence, and then it did something that came to great surprise to Wilbur. The spider stood on its head, pointed its spinnerets into the air, and let loose a cloud of fine silk. The silk formed a balloon, and as Wilbur watched, the spider let go of the fence and rose into the air. "Goodbye," it said as it sailed through the doorway. "Wait a minute," screamed Wilbur. "Where do you think you're going?" But the spider was already out of sight, and then another baby spider crawled to the top of the fence, stood on its head, and made a balloon and sailed away. Then another spider and another, and the air was soon filled with tiny balloons, each balloon carrying a spider. Wilbur was frantic. Charlotte's babies were disappearing at a great rate. "Come back, children," he cried. "Goodbye." They called, "Goodbye, goodbye." At last one little spider took time to stop long enough to talk to Wilbur before making its balloon. "We're leaving here on the warm updraft. This is our moment of setting forth. We're aeronauts, and we're going into the world to make webs for ourselves." "But where?" said Wilbur. "Wherever the wind takes us, high, low, near, far, east, west, north, south, we take to the breeze. We go as we please." "Are all of you going?" said Wilbur. "You can't all go. I would be left alone here with no friends. Your mother wouldn't have wanted that to happen, I'm sure." The air was now so full of balloonists that the barn cellar looked almost as though a mist had gathered. Balloons by the dozens were rising, circling, and drifting away through the doorway, sailing off in the gentle wind. "Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye." Cries came weakly to Wilbur's ears. He couldn't bear to watch any more. In sorrow, he sank to the ground and closed his eyes. It seemed the end of the world to be deserted by Charlotte's children. Wilbur cried himself to sleep. And when he woke up, it was late afternoon, and he looked at the egg sack. It was empty. He looked into the air, and the balloonists were gone. And then he walked drearily to the doorway where Charlotte's web used to be. He was standing there thinking of her when he heard a small voice. "Salutations," it said. "I'm up here." "So am I," said another tiny voice. "So am I," said a third voice. "Three of us are staying. We like this place, and we like you." Wilbur looked up, and at the top of the doorway 3 small webs were being constructed. On each web, working busily, were one of Charlotte's daughters. "Can I take this to mean," said Wilbur, "that you've definitely decided to live here in the barn cellar, and that I'm going to have 3 friends?" "You can indeed," said the spiders. "What are your names, please?" asked Wilbur, trembling with joy. "I'll tell you my name," replied the first little spider, "if you tell me why you're trembling." "I'm trembling with joy," said Wilbur. "Then my name is Joy," said the first spider. "What was my mother's middle initial?" said the second spider. "A," answered Wilbur. "Then my name is Urania," said the spider. "How about me?" said the third spider. "Will you just pick a nice sensible name for me? Something not too long, not too fancy, and not too dumb?" Wilbur thought hard. "Nellie," he suggested. "Fine, I like that very much," said the third spider. "You may call me Nellie." She daintily fastened her orb line to the next spoke of the web. Wilbur's heart brimmed with happiness. He felt that he should make a short speech on this very important occasion. "Joy, Urania, Nellie," he began, "welcome to the barn cellar. You have chosen the hallowed doorway from which to string your webs. I think it is only fair to tell you that I was devoted to your mother. I owe my very life to her. She was brilliant, beautiful, and loyal to the end, and I shall always treasure her memory. To you, her daughters, I pledge my friendship forever and ever." "I pledge mine," said Joy. "I do too," said Urania. "And so do I," said Nellie, who had just managed to catch a small nap. It was a happy day for Wilbur, and many more happy, tranquil days followed. As time went on and the months and years came and went, he never was without friends. Fern didn't come regularly to the barn anymore. She was growing up and was careful to avoid childish things like sitting on a milk stool near the pig pen. But Charlotte's children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren year after year lived in the doorway. Each spring, there were new little spiders hatching out to take place of the old. Most of them sailed away on their balloons, but always 2 or 3 stayed and set up housekeeping in the doorway. Mr. Zuckerman took fine care of Wilbur all the rest of his days, and the pig was visited often by friends and admirers but nobody ever forgot the year of his triumph and the miracle of the web. Life in the barn was very good, night and day, winter, summer, spring and fall, dull days and bright days. It was the best place to be, thought Wilbur, this warm, delicious cellar with geese, the changing seasons, the heat of the sun, the passage of swallows, the nearness of rats, the sameness of sheep, the love of spiders, the smell of manure, and the glory of everything. Wilbur never forgot Charlotte, although he loved her children and grandchildren dearly. None of the new spiders ever quite took her place in his heart. She was in a class by herself. It is not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good writer, and Charlotte was both. And that's the end of Charlotte Webb, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope it becomes one of your favorite books just like it did mine years and years ago.